Throughout the entire history of the NBA, basketball has been in a constant state of revolution. It's almost a completely different game from when it was first invented. If James Naismith was dropped into 2024 and saw what his creation had become, he would probably have a brain aneurysm. The reason I bring this up is because when taking into account how much basketball has changed with the increase of skill level, the addition and rise of the three-point shot, the globalization of the game, it's mind-boggling to me that there are still trends that have remained consistent since the game's conception, one of which being this. You cannot win an NBA championship without an all-time great in their prime on your team. For real. Unlike almost every team sport in the world, the barrier for entry for a NBA championship is not necessarily who has the best team, it's who has the best player with a competent team around them. For every rule though, there are plenty of exceptions. And this season, we just so happen to have one of the few. So if you enjoyed this content, like and subscribe, comment down below, share the video with a friend, and welcome to the Sweatshop. Since the year 1980, there have been 4 teams to win an NBA championship without an all-time great player in their prime. The 2008 Boston Celtics, the infamous 2004 Detroit Pistons, the 2014 San Antonio Spurs, and now the 2024 Boston Celtics. And I already hear Celtics fans, maybe not all of them, but definitely a good portion saying, but Jason Tatum is an all-time great player, to which I say, I'm sorry, he's not. Or I guess I don't believe that would be a better thing to say. I just don't agree with that statement. Honestly, I had like a 2-minute long argument on why I thought there was no case for Jason Tatum being anything more than like the 5th best player in the league. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that it's not a super outlandish take to think Jason Tatum is an all-time great or could at least develop into one. He's still very young. He's shown a lot of flashes. For me personally, he's just a little too inconsistent. I don't fully trust him when I'm rooting for the Celtics. And there are too many nights where he just doesn't look like the best player on the team. Like 60, 70, 80% of the time, he is the best player on the Celtics. But when we're talking about all-time great or even the top 3 players in the league right now, like 99% of the time, they look like the best player on their team in the playoffs. Again, though, if you think Jason Tatum is that good, I mean, he's the best player on the reigning NBA champion, so it's a solid case. I personally just don't believe it. If you do, all power to you. Stay tuned to the video. There's still a lot of cool stuff we go over on how this team was formed and how well-rounded teams like this get constructed. So back to the video. He can be your number 1 option, but you don't necessarily feel overly confident with him in that role. And to understand why that's important, I'd like us to delve a little more into the philosophy of basketball and why it's so different compared to every other sport. Because it is wildly unique. There's no other team sport that I can think of on this planet that has this linear a trend in their champions. A trend of, if you want to be the best team in the league, you have to have one of the best players to ever participate in the sport. And there are 2 reasons for that. 1, other than like, I don't know, beach volleyball, no team sport has less players in the field of play than basketball. This means in basketball, it is easier for one player to take control of a game because there are just less people on the court or field to take it from them. 2, all other sports are much more specialized than basketball. And football is literally in the rules that offensive linemen, debatably the most important players in the game other than the quarterback, can't catch the ball. And even if they could, there's no offensive lineman that has the speed and quickness to play receiver. My knowledge of baseball is pretty limited outside of when the Royals are good, which is almost never. But despite that, I do know there's very few people that can play every single position on defense. Shohei Ohtani has been lauded as debatably the most talented player of all time because he's elite at just 2 of the like 10 positions. In soccer, a defender can technically be an elite goal scorer, but that's almost impossible just due to where they are physically located at on the field. In basketball though, there's nothing stopping anyone from being elite at whatever they want to be elite at, other than simply talent. That's why so many of our NBA champions have all-time greats, not just leading, but carrying the team. Because as hard as it is to find an all-time great, and believe me, it's hard, almost impossible, it's at least 10 times more difficult to make a championship team without one of these guys. It's a lot easier to find one guy who can consistently get good shots for himself or his teammates literally just by virtue of his own talent than it is to acquire 5 different guys who can collectively and consistently get good shots. When it does work though, it's hard to stop. Just look at this year's championship round. The Mavs sell out and succeed in stopping Jason Tatum scoring in multiple games. Cool. Jrue Holiday starts getting wide open layups. Kristaps gets easy mid-range post-ups. Derek White gets catch and shoot, open corner threes, etc. Again, when it does happen though, these teams can beat any all-time great you throw at them. And by any, I do mean any. Look at who the 4 teams to win without an all-time great player in their prime beat in the NBA Finals. The 2004 Pistons beat the Los Angeles Lakers with Shaq and Kobe. The 2008 Boston Celtics beat prime Black Mamba. The 2014 Beautiful Game Spurs beat Apex LeBron James, prime D-Wade, and the rest of the Heatles. The 2024 Boston Celtics beat Luka Doncic, a player who I would say 30 to 40% of people, me included, already call the most talented offensive player of all time. These teams are hard to build, but when they do finally get built, they are almost impossible to beat, no matter the talent of your best player. And that's because you don't know who to exploit. Strategy in every facet of competition, but especially in sports, boils down to one thing. What weakness of our opponent are we going to take advantage of? Teams built like the 2004 Pistons or the 2024 Boston Celtics are so well-rounded and balanced though, their weaknesses are almost imperceptible. So if these teams are so good, what makes them so difficult to build? Well, I was able to come up with 3 reasons. 1, ego. It's simple really. Most of, if not all, professional athletes have a lot of ego, whether it's justifiable or not. It's almost impossible to get that good at something so popular without having at least a little bit of ego. Thus, it is a bit difficult for a lot of these guys to set their egos aside and just fit in as cogs in a system, especially when they feel their talents are being underutilized. The first iteration of the Celtics super team, ironically the Kyrie version, is the perfect example of what I'm trying to explain. I thought the Kyrie, Gordon Hayward Boston Celtics were going to be an elite team when they were first formed. I legitimately thought, okay, this was the team that was going to take down the Death Lineup Warriors, primarily for the same reasons this iteration of the Boston Celtics were so dominant. Everyone on this team theoretically fit together. Everyone in the starting lineup was a good to elite shooter, elite defensive versatility, 4 good to great shot creators, and everyone was a good passer. Like, this team just made sense to me, philosophically. Then when they actually play together, they are slowly falling apart for the entire season, and almost solely due to egos clashing. Pretty much every player from Tatum to Hayward to Kyrie to Jaylen Brown has come out and said this exact thing, almost verbatim. No one was willing to sacrifice their role, and I think that attitude is more common than not in the entirety of the NBA. Not everyone has 2 star players that are comfortable with the whole who's better than who conversation. Not everyone has someone who is the 2nd or 3rd best player on a championship team still in their prime and is comfortable dropping to the 5th option offensively and just focusing on defense without a fuss. Not everyone can find 4 to 5 guys who are okay with starring in their roles and not necessarily being seen as star players league-wide. The second reason these teams are difficult to build: assets. Really, these teams are hard to build because with the restrictions front offices have on them, especially now with the new CBA, these teams are literally just hard to build. Why is that? Well, to build this no legend team, you gotta have 4 to 5 star level players. That's ignoring fit too, which just adds even further difficulty. No, let's just focus on the bare minimum here. How do we acquire 4 to 5 star level players regardless of fit? To acquire them in free agency is absurdly difficult because you most likely have to overpay and give them a max contract to come to your roster, which is something most teams just don't have the cap space for. To trade for them, you most likely have to give up a lot of assets. Most teams don't have the assets to acquire 1 star player, let alone 3, without completely gutting their roster. To acquire them in the draft would be the best case scenario, but we've already been over how difficult it is to draft NBA players in previous videos. It's nearly impossible. The only way these teams can be formed within the confines of the NBA's rules is to either have an embarrassing amount of cap space and assets, similar to the 08 Celtics, have elite culture and player development like the San Antonio Spurs, or find star players and guys who are undervalued by the rest of the league. For the 04 Pistons, Chauncey Billups' value as a floor general was not capitalized upon until he reached Detroit. Ben Wallace had one season as a starter and he was mediocre. Rip Hamilton was seen by a lot of people as an empty stat scorer. Rasheed Wallace was seen as more trouble than what he was worth. They come together though, in addition to Tayshaun Prince, and they all fit into the Pistons machine and each one of their talents is brought to the forefront. Then the rest of the league finally learns, oh wow, these guys were stars. Same thing with the 24 Celtics. Drew Holiday, is he over the hill? Is he cooked on offense? I don't know. Boston acquires him and he's the perfect fifth option, while still being pound for pound the best defender in the league. Kristaps had a nice rejuvenation year with the Wizards, but still, is he built for the playoffs? How is he in the locker room? Celtics get him and he's one of the most impactful two-way players on the team. Derek White on the Spurs had some flashes but nothing consistent. Is he just a good role player or a legitimate high-level starter on a championship team? Goes to the Celtics and almost immediately proves the latter correct. Finding one of these, I won't say surprises, but players who give more impact than expected in a new role, finding one of these guys is spectacular for most organizations. The Celtics have found 3 of them, 2 in a single offseason, while still having 2 perennial all-stars on their roster. Oh, and they all fit together on offense and on defense like puzzle pieces. And despite this, despite the Celtics doing almost everything correctly as far as the front office moves go, they are still in cap hell. This year their starting lineup made a combined $155 million, a number that on its own would rank higher than 8 teams' total salary this season. The reason they were able to do this was because their entire bench, 6 through 15, cost a combined $28 million. And they just got not lucky, but a little fortunate that they were able to get solid production out of 4 of them. Next year, when Jaylen Brown's Supermax contract just starts to kick in, the Celtics starting lineup will be making $164 million, a number that would rank higher than 5 teams' total salary next year. And while this does mean the Celtics will fall into the second apron, whose limitations we've already extensively discussed on this channel in previous videos, I don't say all this to disparage the Celtics and say they're screwed, because they're obviously not. Unlike the Suns, the Celtics' concentration of salary is spread across 5 players, not 3. Don't quote me on this, but I actually think the Suns' big 3 may cost more than the Celtics' entire starting lineup. So yes, the Celtics may have trouble getting a few bench players. The Suns are going to have trouble getting starters. Oh, and also, the Celtics, again, unlike the Suns, they don't need to make any new moves. We know this setup works. They literally just became champions. And also, 3 of their 4 main bench players are still under contract for next year. So Celtics fans, don't go hating on me. I didn't bring up salary to shit on your team. I brought it up just to emphasize how hard these teams are to keep together, much less build. More importantly though, I go over all this to commend the Celtics. So many teams and team owners in every sport treat their organization like an investment and would prefer being consistently good rather than striving for excellence and risking making a move that could cripple your franchise. A lot of teams in the Celtics position last year would not have moved the muscle, just said, hey, if we win a chip with this roster, excellent. But at the very least, with our drafting and development, we'll always have a fun, competitive team that's in the mix. No, the Celtics pulled the trigger to snatch the opportunity to become an all-time dominant team, and I 100% appreciate that. It is very refreshing. Kudos to everyone on the Celtics, from the stars to the supporting players, from the front office to the coach. You all deserve this win. Congratulations. With that, thank you ladies and gentlemen for watching the video all the way through. We greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this content, go ahead and like and subscribe. We got a lot of good stuff coming to you this off season, so if you want to stay occupied, just like and subscribe, hit that notification button. Comment down below what you think of the Celtics championship run this year. Share the video with a friend, and as always, stay sweaty, ladies and gentlemen.